Welcome to Loblolly Press in Conversation. I'm Andrew Mack, and if it feels like you're walking into the middle of something in this episode, you are. And we actually meant for you to feel that way. We start this kind of odd episode in the Loblolly Press universe with the intersection of barbecue and publishing. We start in one of the hardest places that barbecue can actually take you, which is Maurice's Piggie Park in Columbia, South Carolina. The Confederate flag was flown over their restaurants for many years. There was white supremacist literature left on the order counter. And we talk about the harm that a plate of food can carry alongside those people who would still rather call it just about the food. We begin there on purpose because you can't tell the truth about South Carolina barbecue or any kind of barbecue without that real history. So my guests today are Nathan Spainhour, the designer and author of the South Carolina BBQ Project, Signs, Symbols, and Stories from the Pit, and Lib Ramos, who is the founder of Good Printed Things in Greenville, South Carolina, and also the publisher of this book. Nathan's book began as a graduate thesis and grew into something closer to a record of barbecue history, a design study of a foodway that's told through the hand-painted signs, roadside shacks, styrofoam plates, and all of the sauces that you could imagine in South Carolina. At first glance, barbecue seems like a simple plate, but it's not. And so I hope you'll stay with us through this episode and hear about some of that complexity. This is the perfect summer book. I feel like it was made for me. It's about my native state, South Carolina, and I'm so excited for you to listen and to pick up your copy from Good Printed Things. Enjoy.
Yeah, so just to be clear, I just want to preface this with, Maurice, when he died and passed away in 2014, and his kids took over the Maurice's barbecue chain, and they've publicly stated, we're in this for the food, not for the politics, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that there is an active contingent, like they're actively trying to, for lack of a better term, be better, right? And put that kind of behind them. I don't see any signs of them hiding it or anything like that. It's just more of I just want to kind of clarify. It's a new people on it. But that being said,
Did you talk to them for the book?
not officially. We since the book has been released, we've sent them copies and we've conversed very widely via email and whatnot. But I wanted to be really transparent. It's not. It's a sensitive subject, and I
Difficult history.
yeah.
Actually, I found it a little bit hard to read that they're going to say something like, it's not about politics, it's about the food. Because the reality is, it's like harm was done.
Yeah.
I should let you finish your story first, but the reality is that there's significant harm done. And to have no sense of kind of remorse or reparations for that is like a pretty tough thing to swallow. As someone who grew up eating Maurice's barbecue a couple times a month,
And it's fascinating, right? I thought, well, briefly what the story is, Maurice is honestly, well, when he started his place, I don't remember the dates or anything off the top of my head, but he was kind of the the rep for lack. I'm trying to kind of get the wording right, but I would say he was the face of barbecue in South Carolina for the time from the 70s and the 80s. If you knew anything about barbecue and you knew about South Carolina barbecue, the Bessenger name was the name. His dad invented the mustard sauce that we all know as South Carolina's, signature sauce. Maurice and his brothers all run different barbecue restaurants, but Maurice specifically had the largest one.
heck, a business acumen, really.
Yes.
Multiple chains throughout the Midlands.
And it had a lot. I mean, there were a lot of different locations. And the thing about Maurice is he was a very public white supremacist. And he was on George Wallace's campaign, which, George Wallace was from Alabama. Was the center's really not great situation. He, as Andrew said, flew the Confederate flag over his restaurants. And, when I think it's all in the book. It's like I'm trying to remember specifically why, but there were different dates. And that stuff isn't that long ago. That's like the early 2000s. So it felt really, all that being said, that was a thing that was happening. And I remember my parents talking about, this is not in the book, but like my dad talked about going down to Piggie Park on the way to the beach, through Columbia, and you would be ordering at the counter. There was like material, like pamphlets and things like that, just where you ordered food.
I wonder what my schoolmates and classmates and people growing up who were people of color thought about when they were there, if they went there, or where did they go if not? And so I really, especially when we talk about nearing the end of the book, talking about Rodney Scott, like Rodney Scott is like he's carrying on the tradition of like the idea of a whole hog roast, which comes from Black tradition in the South. So I think, you do an amazing job of rounding out that history of barbecue with being like, this is actually part of the Black tradition in the South. It's not this, it's not actually what Maurice is.
And I think that's one of the reasons I really wanted to tell the Maurice story, because of the contrast that exists today, at least in the context of barbecue.
Yeah.
And like, who is the new face of barbecue?
And it being your barbecue picture in the South, I think you're right.
Mm-hmm. So it was interesting.
And I'll say, as the publisher, I really appreciated that Nathan is telling these case study stories across the state. And I really appreciated how you included the story about Piggie Park, because it is part of South Carolina's history. I think as a person who did not grow up in South Carolina, it would be easy for me to not know those stories, kind of coming in post 2000s. And I think it's really important to understand how we got to here. So for me, I really appreciated that. There's so much history and culture layered into our food, and specifically being able to look at it through a barbecue lens is so interesting. I think I had this experience with Glennis's State Park poetry books, where there's this idea of it's poetry, it's nature, but you don't have to dig too deep to sort of hit our state's history with segregation and racism and all of that. And it's right there when it comes to food, and we can't just pretend that that's not the case. I really think it's an important lens, because you are picking up this book about food, but there's intrinsically history and stories and culture and mistakes, and that, there's so much wrapped up in this single plate of cuisine that at first glance seems basic. I like that you've talked about how growing up in South Carolina, barbecue is just barbecue. Like it's just pervasive.
You don't. This yesterday. Mm-hmm. I moved out of Columbia to go to college in Rock Hill, which is an hour away, and I was like, "This is not barbecue." I was so sheltered in my like understanding of food culture like that, that when I moved to New Hampshire, and I was like, "Where is the barbecue?" And now I live in Asheville, and I'm like, this is an interesting little spot for barbecue. Mm-hmm. We're right on the edge of what I would consider to be kind of the vinegar style, but we're stuck so close to South Carolina, not stuck, but we are so close to South Carolina that there's that influence. And then on top of that, Asheville is a place where people move to. So then we get places like Bear's Barbecue, which catered my wedding, and they're Kansas City style barbecue in the middle of Asheville.
Well, that's a great, one of my favorite barbecue places in the state currently. I say currently because that obviously changes over time, but is Elliot Moss's Elliot's Barbecue. What is the Elliot's? He's got a great name, but it's Elliot's Barbecue. He's in Florence, South Carolina. Okay. He's from Florence, but he made his name in Asheville at Buxton Hall.
Yes.
He was the main pitmaster there, and they left after COVID or something happened there. But
closed down while I've been living there. Yeah, I never got to go actually.
But he's great, and he went back to Florence. He's from Florence, so he went back to Florence, started Whole Hog. So he does Whole Hog Barbecue in the PD, just like Scott's Barbecue. And then he had a guy who worked with him who at Buxton Hall, and I may be getting this wrong. I can't remember off the top of my head, but he might be from Columbia originally, but he's now living in Hollywood South Carolina, outside of Edisto, and he started Easton Barbecue Company. So it's like two people who were originally from South Carolina, met each other in Asheville, or worked together in Asheville, made barbecue up there, and then moved back to South Carolina in two different spots, and now running their own things. It's really interesting.
And just absolutely to what you were saying earlier, it's everything on that plate it's social, it's cultural, it's political, and there are very few cuisines where you, like, as a person who are from this place right now, feel like that's true for. That, like, barbecue does tell that whole story.
It's been a fun project to work on. I feel like I've learned a ton. I love that there's like sections on the sides. And now when I go to order at a barbecue place, I'm like thinking, all right, what sides do I need to get the full experience? And like, what's unique to this spot? There's just so much in it. I mean, even all down to like, where do the pigs come from? It's so educational and eye-opening in so many ways that I think people will be pleasantly surprised when they pick it up. It's just like the barbecue plate. It's like, it looks like one thing on the surface, and then you realize there's just so much depth to it.
Let's talk about maps. I'm looking through the book right now as you're talking, because there's so many different versions of maps, and I wanted to kind of touch on a few and how they differ. But one of the ones that's the most striking, and I think you know which one I'm going to say, is the sauce map. And I can't seem to find it.
It's toward the beginning.
It's an early introduction. Here it is. And I'll post this for everyone to see once we upload the episode. But it's, the state divided by the type of sauces that are, I guess, like they're most known for.
Mm-hmm.
And whose idea was it? How did it come up? Curious. Is it just something?
It's one of my favorite.
Crazy brain. You're like,
one of my favorite parts of the book, and it's all Nathan.
Well, this whole thing started as using graphic design as a mode of inquiry, right?
Well, that's a good point, because we should say that this is not a history
of
South Carolina barbecue. It is a discussion of design as it relates to barbecue.
Yes.
An important lens that you're bringing to the...
And I think that's the whole thing that's so, I love the idea of it being the plate of barbecue, and there's like so much underneath it, because that is the thing. So it started as a visual exploration, and I think that particular map was made early on in the development, when I was kind of exploring, how did I want this to live, right? How did I want this to live visually? What was the story I was trying to tell? And there's a lot of elements in there where there's a lot of stuff obviously that it didn't make it in there too. So it was during that phase of experimentation, and I had bought all these sauces, and I learned South Carolina officially, according to the Barbecue Association or whatever, is the only state that has 4 official sauces. So I thought that was important to call out. And there was this map that was made, and that map originally was made in the 80s, and it was a research paper from 2 professors at University of South Carolina. And they had done all this research, and I just thought it was amazing that they had devoted that time and energy to make this map, And so I had all the sauces, and I had access at the time to a laser cutter. So I basically made the map a template out of the I had wood, and I laser cut wood, and I made a template, and I put it on top of newsprint, and I poured the sauces in the template, and I pulled it up, and then took photos
as quickly as you could.
As quickly as I could.
Smear everywhere.
If you look at them,
you have to thicken the vinegar sauce,
a little bit. So some of that's like trickery, right?
Yeah, that's design, but
exactly. But yeah.
But I love in the final draft, Nathan included sort of a process photo of making of this map in the very back. And there it is. It's right before the index, because I think that it's easy to look at something like that and be like, oh, this is just, computer generated, whatever. No, this is hands-on sauce on newsprint, and this is
you
how
can see the wrinkles in the final. Yeah, and the sauce is soaking into the right side for sure.
That was my favorite part about it. Is that exactly? I was like, you can see the paper. It's cool.
This is real.
So it's interesting, because it's like now we're gonna go way. But I am obsessed with some of the things that you are doing, in particular, because you're talking about the print culture. You're saying print is still important, and your work, Nathan, is around in part that same idea, but also that physical media,
Mm-hmm.
physical things that you hold are important. And to make the map, and of course, I'm sure there's editing done, whatever, but to make the map and have it be real paper, real barbecue sauce and things that you created yourself is so important to the ethos of the book, because that's how barbecue is made. You can't AI generate barbecue.
I think that is what's so interesting about this book, is that it's a record of like barbecue artifacts in South Carolina. If you flip through it, you see signs, you see logos, you see styrofoam cups, you see, everything about this process is analog. And so it feels really fitting for it to be, what do I want to say, like ensconced in, or like immortalized in print, because that there's just something really appropriate. We cover everything from newspaper advertisements for barbecue from the turn of the century to, it's
Google Trends.
it's like, it's a fascinating snapshot of an industry that is timeless because it's analog and there are no shortcuts. This is 14, 16 hours of smoking meat at a low temperature. You can't shortcut that. You can't fast track it. It is what it is, and it's only good because it's done the old-fashioned way. So maybe I'm biased as someone who makes print books, but I do think that
print books, like your books are not available.
I don't do ebooks, and I feel strongly about the ability to hold a book in your hands and read it, and so I think, subject matter, it all feels very appropriate. So I love that sauce map.
There is something to be said about the artifact, right? And holding a physical object, a tangible thing, and experiencing that. And there are different ways to experience it, as far as, from the design perspective, you have a lot of control about how people can experience it. And I think that was a big thing here. It was really important to me that the entire experience was designed. It wasn't, not that typically like books are designed, obviously, but this was like, I wanted everything about it to kind of feed into the concept of it. But, one of the quotes in there that I love, it might be like pass you by when you read it, but I think it's great. It's Ryan Fertile, who wrote an incredible book about, if you want to read a really wonderful one about place and barbecue and all that, it's his book, and it's called The One True Barbecue. I think that's the title of it. It's a wonderful book, but it's him and a photographer friend of his got in a camper and drove around the South interviewing pitmasters. Fantastic. And that is what inspired the case studies in this book. But he said that, barbecue is like mainly an open source profession, because you can talk to any pitmaster and they will tell you exactly how they make their food, which is kind of unusual in the world of like high, chefs and cooking and things like that. I get, at least in the general knowledge of it. And the reason is because they know that no one's going to go over and try to compete with it, because it's hard work. It's really hard work to do it well. And the one thing they won't share is the sauce recipes, because that's a little different. But it's kind of like, I think there's something about that. And I think that's what we're kind of saying. It's like there's this idea of sharing and like wanting people to be involved, but also understanding that there's a lot of work involved in it. And getting people to appreciate that, I think, is kind of the key, or getting people the knowledge that they end up appreciating it, I guess, or something like that. But it's cool.
Speaking of food, since we're talking about barbecue, what is hash? Can tell everyone while we're laughing.
Okay, so my favorite quote about hash was from Robert Moss, and he called it, "It's like a thick meat gravy." And I thought that was the best description of hash I'd heard. And, this is coming from a man who like wrote the history of barbecue, and hash is essentially, everybody's hash recipes, I believe, is a little different, but it's essentially the pieces and parts of the pig that don't go into the barbecue thing. But it's not like a hot dog. It's not like that bad. It's, but they let it stew all day, and you typically serve it with rice. And one thing I learned when I can't remember if it's even in the book or not, but one thing I did learn is during I-26, the interstate from Asheville essentially down to Columbia, part of that's called like the hash corridor. And towards the upper left, there is a place I talk about in there called Midway Barbecue in Union. They have amazing hash if you haven't been there. It's like beef. It's like made out of beef. And then I know as you go towards Columbia, it becomes more pork. And so there's that. And then also, obviously, with Columbia being in the Midlands, it's got the more orange tint too because of the sauce, where, in the upper corner of the state, it's not so much. So it's even got it's nuanced unto itself, right? Like hash. And
it's actually a statement. If you order it at a different, it's like they'll come to one thing, I think, where every restaurant you'll order it at is different.
It is.
And you will test it and you will like certain ones better than others, and just probably based on preference. But the one that I know primarily, and one that I make, is not necessarily like the bits and pieces, because I think the home cook is not accessing bits and pieces of any animal, but just made from like Boston butt, like,
yes,
like shoulder, and just cooking it down for hours and hours and hours, and then till there's just bits of pork, and then apple cider vinegar, mustard, some sugar, and it just is so nice. It's like one of my favorite things in the whole world.
One of my favorite visuals of hash, other than the meat gravy, is reading about the history of it. They used to have these hash houses. Usually, my brain's associating them with like mill villages and towns, and you would have these little huts with the big cauldron and the hash, and people would get off work and they would go get their hash, and then they'd go home, and it would be like a meal, right? Either lunch or dinner or something like that. They ended up kind of closing them down for DHEC reasons. It's just a random hut with a big old cauldron in it. But I think in the back of the book, I ask a ton of questions like, couldn't get to everything, but here are the next ones I have. And that's one of them, is like, I feel like there is an entire project around hash in the same vein. Like, I want to do another thing just about that. And that would be much smaller audience, I think. But it's
I think people who love barbecue, and they're willing to read about it. I do. One thing I wanted to ask, we're talking about, you mentioned kind of the hash house and how that is part of the history as well, is the kind of gentrification of barbecue. Can we call it that? I'm not sure if that's the nicest way to put it, but it is true that we now have, people. I don't know how to say this necessarily, except to say that like people who made barbecue on a smaller scale, scaling up, which then requires a certain like businessification of it all. Then it becomes a little bit less about walking in and knowing the people that made the pork and are cooking it and having a relationship with the food, and more about the experience of just eating the food, which is, a beautiful thing in and of itself. But it's very different, right? Like,
I think I'm glad we're talking about this, because I do think that is sort of where some of the roots of the project came from, where from a design perspective, Nathan and I are both designers, looking at branding and looking at sort of these more polished corporate versions of barbecue in contrast to the original barbecue, and just kind of trying to make sense of this visually. And then that becomes this whole project of documentation of, let's look at all the logos, let's put them side by side, let's categorize them, that is definitely part of this project and this inquiry into the visual culture of barbecue in South Carolina.
That's one of the maps, right? I call it a map. It's not necessarily
a
geographical map, but like the pig. Here you go. So there's a graphic in the middle of the book, spans 2 pages, that is a pig with all of the barbecue logos centered on like, correct me if I'm wrong, but like the kind of like which kinds of pigs.
It's like the butcher diet of a pig. Yeah, I limited it to the upstate because there's so many barbecue places in the state, and I think one of my thoughts is like I would love to do that for every region, just to see what the differences are. But yeah, just kind of breaking them down and looking, from a design perspective, like, what are the choices that were made? And why is it that, there are pigs in the logos that are also chefs? Because that's implying that they're eating other pigs. And,
because even if you look at the back here with no pigs in the thing, it's like you have Lewis barbecue, which obviously you mentioned, we were talking about this, but it's Texas barbecue that has kind of made its way over.
Yes.
And it is definitely one of the more like, what's the word?
Polished
version
Yes.
of things. But then you have that alongside something like Henry's Smokehouse, which we just ate at today.
Yes.
And that logo, somebody drew that at some point back in the day. And like, it doesn't appear on the sign, it's just like.
And everywhere it appears is different.
There's no sort of consistency. So.
Yeah, I think that that, like Lib said, that was one of the big impetuses or one of the big starting points where, obviously I was studying place and studying history and wanting to know about where I was from, which obviously is South Carolina. And then,
well, you said you're from Anderson?
I'm from Anderson, which is in the upstate. Yeah. And I think that the other question at the time was exactly what Lib said. It's like, what do you trust more as a consumer or as a person who's going to get barbecue for lunch? Would you rather go to the place that's kind of ramshackle, or would you rather go to the really polished place on Main Street? And, more often than not, people will choose the other place. And coming from a background of design and branding and all that, that's kind of a big deal.
You seem to understand, or at least the locals understand, which place you're going to end up with better barbecue. Where I have family members who used to come into town and we would inevitably end up at Sticky Fingers downtown because that's, quote, barbecue. And it's like the locals know better. So it is a very interesting, I
makes it subculture. Essentially, that like you get to participate in this thing that not everyone's going to get to participate in, and in that way, it makes it feel. And I guess I should say not get to participate. Like, it is a thing that is part of our innate local knowledge, like who we are and where we live and where we're from.
Yes,
it's like we make
and how you know where to get barbecue.
And it matters that Lewis Barbecue for me has a logo like that because I don't know about Lewis Barbecue. So if I'm seeing it for the first time coming into town, oh, that place looks interesting. It looks safe. It looks good, but it's totally different if you live in Greenville and you know the barbecue places and you don't really care what the sign looks like because you know the barbecue.
Well, and I think for you talk about this a little bit in the book, almost as an entry point, some of these more polished places being a way for folks to begin to appreciate the craft and then again dig deeper. Where are the roots of this? I think Rodney Scott is such a great example of this. If you're in Charleston and you end up at Rodney Scott's, you have this delicious barbecue, I think your natural curiosity is, how did this end up here? How is it so good? And hopefully it leads you back to the roots in Hemingway, South Carolina, to understand more of the story behind the story. So I think if you're curious, you'll kind of make your way to the origins anyway, but this book is definitely supposed to kind of help push you there a little bit quicker.
That's a great way to put it. I think about that a lot because going into it, it was like a simple concept. And then when it's finished, or when you get through it, when I finished writing it, it became a lot more nuanced, right? And there's something to be said. So back to kind of what you were saying originally, Andrew, like there is almost like a new wave, right, of these polished, in air quotes, right, restaurants. It's almost like, we're polished, but we also want to look like the old stuff or whatever.
Or nod to it, maybe.
Yeah.
It's like the butcher paper on the trays. Like you kind of have that feeling that there's an acknowledgement of the past. And I mean, this quote you pulled here from Carr.
Nicholas Carr.
Yeah. To remain vital, culture must be renewed and applied to the members of every generation. Outsource memory and cultural living. Like, I think that's where it feels like a lot of barbecue is headed. That like we have the institutions. They'll hopefully remain the institutions through projects like this and things that we can like hold on to and maybe local communities. But then there are also there's a futurity to it that it's going to evolve and change, and we have to try to not let that be like an enemy to something that could be good. I'm not saying that.
Yeah, I mean, it's like the positive side is like Lib said, the new places are attracting new fans, and if they're interested, they'll dig deeper and see the things that have been around for a long time, the ideas that have been around for a long time, the people that have been around for a long time, and the restaurants too. And so I don't necessarily see it as a bad thing, other than it's just change. It's just change.
Change is all we have.
Exactly.
Yeah. I think of this as a similar metaphor as when I was growing up. I grew up in a really tiny town in South Carolina for the first 15 years of my life, named Swansea, South Carolina.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And there, when I was growing up, there was first of all, my grandfather grew up there in the 50s. So it was very different when I was there. But we always had something called the coffee shop. And it was the place where people would go eat from 9 to 2. And that's it.
Yes.
Well, actually, probably a little bit before that, honestly, because I would go before my dad went to work in construction. Promises to go to somewhere. Because I saw it just was called the coffee shop. There was no branding. There wasn't a thing. It was a place that we went to, and then, one day it disappeared. And I think about that a lot of how, when you go to new places or you move around, what do you lose in some ways? The kind of feeling that you know a place, but you don't need to have this branding associated with the kind of story that goes with it. It's just that it is until it's not. And so I think that's the part where I loved this is preservation as well, that I'm gonna get to put this on my bookshelf and feel makes me kind of emotional, but to feel that I've got something to look at every now and then when I feel I want to be nostalgic or think back on, barbecue that I grew up around and can still go to. By the way, a lot of these places are still places to go. So
I love your word preservation, because I think you touch on that a little bit in sort of the way that some of these roadside spots evolve over time. And every time you go, maybe the signs are a little different. Maybe there's different photos on the wall. Maybe there's different people behind a counter, but the institutions are still there. I think there's something, talking about, traditions of stopping for barbecue on the way to the beach, or, these might be places where families go once a year, and appreciating the longstanding nature of the food and the cuisine itself, and how many people's stories, they're part of. I think that's a really interesting thing to think about, how this food is intertwined in our culture. And you were telling me, Nathan, about how many people have come up to you and said, told a story about the place that the barbecue place was in their town growing up, or the place they went on the way to somewhere else, or everybody has a barbecue story. And I think that's really interesting. And I love that this book is getting people to talk about those stories. Maybe it's a place they hadn't thought about in years. Maybe it doesn't exist anymore. Maybe it does. But there's something really, really beautiful about helping people remember their food memories, and maybe acknowledging that other places don't have the mustard sauce, or just different little pieces or components of this one place I had this side I'll never forget. I got to tell you about it. It's just, it encourages storytelling. And I think that's really, really beautifully human.
Thank you for listening to Loblolly Press and Conversation. This episode was produced, edited, and mastered by me, Andrew Mack, from my home in Asheville, North Carolina. Loblolly Press is dedicated to amplifying emerging voices from the American South, with a focus on queer, BIPOC, and rural writers. To learn more about our books, our authors, and what's coming next, head to loblollypress.com and subscribe to our newsletter. You can also find us on Instagram at loblolly_press for updates, behind-the-scenes content, and a lot more. If you like this episode, please do consider leaving a review or sharing it with a friend. It really helps us keep going and supports the writers we believe in.